We're the Louisiana Oil and Gas Association. We represent Louisiana's oil and natural gas industry in the state of Louisiana. We have about 1,700 members from all sectors of the oil and gas industry, service, exploration and production. Pretty much anyone and everyone that's involved in the oil and gas industry falls under our association.
What does the oil and gas industry mean to Louisiana?
Well, you know, it's obviously one of the major drivers of the economy. I mean, 17% or 15 to 17% of the state budget is directly attributed to oil and gas revenues. It's a major driver of the economy in areas like Acadiana and Shreveport and New Orleans. We're a key part of the energy industry in the entire country.
We'll get started with opening remarks. We'll go in the order of Senator Vitter, Representative Edwards, Lieutenant Governor Darden, and then Commissioner Angel. Gentlemen, you each have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, beginning with Senator Vitter.
Thanks so much, Jason, and thanks to all of you. Thanks to LOGA for the invitation. Really been looking forward to the visit. And even more importantly, thanks for all the partnership, the work you do for our economy, the work we do together to make the environment here for the energy industry as positive as it can be. I certainly feel at home because of that partnership, because of that work, but going even further back. I grew up in New Orleans like a lot of folks in the oil and gas industry. My dad was a petroleum engineer his whole career at Chevron. For most of that, he was chief of production out of their main Louisiana office, so he oversaw all of their operations throughout the Gulf and on a lot of land property. And I grew up with him taking me out to rigs on helicopters pretty regularly. I'm sure Chevron lawyers would never allow that anymore, for sure. But thank God they did in 1973 when I was 12. It was a great part of my upbringing and education. I think because of that, I've brought that spirit and support for energy to all of my work in politics, certainly including in the Congress. And because of that, I think I have a very strong record on behalf of the energy industry, the strongest, bar none, of any of the candidates for governor. Now, I have to say, I want to do a disclaimer. I'm not the guy who single-handedly ended the moratorium by giving a speech at the Cajun Dome. That's not me. But I have done some things. I did help lead our delegation through that very tough time, working to end the moratorium as quickly as we could, working to constantly put pressure on the administration to do the right thing and allow drilling again. And I did that by taking concrete action, holding nominations, blocking a pay raise for Ken Salazar until we saw real improvements in permitting, meeting weekly and setting up meetings with many of you literally on a weekly basis with the head of Bessie and other key members of the administration. I helped disclose, I helped break the story when it was found out that the Obama White House had in fact doctored the report of their 60-day commission, suggesting that the scientists on that commission supported the moratorium when they absolutely did not. I've blocked and defeated liberal Democratic efforts in the Congress to eliminate various federal tax incentives for energy, and that's a constant struggle that so far, thank goodness, we're winning. I blocked the nomination of Gina McCarthy to be the new head of EPA until we got very specific and concrete movement on transparency and reforms at the EPA to make sure they began to consider the costs of their regulations. And now I am all in, very involved in opposing some horrendous rules that they're considering, like the ozone rule, like the carbon-related rules. And I continue to fight the Obama administration and that avalanche of over-regulation. I helped pass OCS revenue sharing, Go Mesa. That's extremely important for the state, and I helped lead that effort with the whole delegation. And last but certainly not least, I've been an active partner with LOGA on what I think is the single most important issue with regard to our business environment in Louisiana, and that is a horrendous litigation climate. I actively partnered with LOGA in 2012 to push and demand that the governor and the state legislature do what they clearly didn't want to do and take up the legacy lawsuit issue. That only happened because of outside pressure from you, from LOGA, from me, and others, because the Jindal administration and his inner circle did not want to do that. In fact, they were taking the side of the trial lawyers and the big landowners. And we made progress by bringing that public pressure and passing important legislation. Now, we have much further to go on the legacy front. We have much further to go on tort reform and to bring the industry back, particularly considering the challenges of low price that we all face right now. I'm committed to do that as an active leader as governor, and I'm committed to work with you as a very full partner in that process. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Edwards, over to you.
Thank you, Jason. I want to thank everybody for being here and giving me an opportunity to visit with you. We've done several of these so far. This is the first one that started at 7:45 in the morning, though. I know y'all are businesslike and like to get to work, and that's a wonderful thing. Thank you also for what you do for the state and for the nation. Obviously, the oil and gas industry is incredibly important, not just for the economy of our country, but really strategically as well. And so I appreciate what you all do. Today, I'm here to have an honest conversation to answer the questions as best I can. I have a record in the legislature. I won't run from my record. It's something that I'm comfortable with, but I'm sure that as we go through these questions, there's going to be some areas of disagreement, and for me, that's okay, because reasonable people can always disagree about where to strike the balance between competing interests. I was very happy to see that of the 7 questions, 3 relate to litigation. That makes me very comfortable being up here this morning. But it's important that we have an honest conversation. And part of that, I want you to know, starts with me meeting with LOGA representatives. And by the way, you all are served very well by Don and Gifford and the others at LOGA. It starts before the session when I routinely visit with them to see if there's areas where we can work together. They oftentimes will ask me to look at draft legislation just to let them know what I'm thinking about it and what concerns I might have. And then that continues through and after the legislative sessions. And obviously, as governor, that will continue. That's just part of my personality. It's part of my style. That's the way that I will govern as well. I want you to know that also I've never surprised your leadership at the Capitol with my position on any of the issues that are important to you. And sometimes I'm supportive of those issues and sometimes that I'm not. But I'm always honest, and I have never surprised you. I will tell you that in 2012, I was very pleased to work with LOGA and others in order to come up with a bill to make sure that we codified what's required with respect to disclosure of the ingredients that go into the fracking solution, because I had people in Tangipahoa Parish and St. Helena Parish who were especially concerned about fracking operations there in light of the Kentwood water aquifer. We were able to do that, and we worked through that without any problems and ended up with a bill that both LOGA and the Sierra Club supported. And that'll tell you a little bit more about me and how I like to work with all the stakeholders and see whether some consensus can be obtained. That's how I was taught, and that's how I was trained. I'm an engineer. Well, I don't work as an engineer, but I'm trained as an engineer and educated at West Point, where I graduated in 1988. And I then spent 8 years on active duty in the Army as an airborne ranger. So I jumped out of airplanes at 2 o'clock in the morning. So being here at 7:45 in the morning looking at you is a little easier, I suspect, because of that. But I want you to also know that my classmates at West Point elected me to enforce the honor code. That was my job in the Corps of Cadets in my first first of the year, which is the senior year. That's why it's important that we have an honest conversation this morning and every day, and that's all that you'll ever get from me. I've got 3 kids. They're all right here in Louisiana. One's at LSU, one's at Southeastern. I've got a son in the 7th grade who's in the Tangipahoa Parish School System where my wife teaches. So we are absolutely committed to this great state. We know the role that you all play in keeping this state great, making sure that our economy moves forward, that we have jobs and careers available for the people right here in Louisiana. And I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you. As we look forward to the session that starts next month, I will tell you we have huge challenges. We have not met our challenges head on the last several years. I hope we will do that this year. That's my expectation as we go into session, because we cannot realize and take advantage of the tremendous opportunities we have in this state if we don't first face our challenges head on, and that deals primarily with the structural deficit that we have in the state of Louisiana. So thank you. It's my pleasure to be here with you this morning, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Representative Edwards. Lieutenant Governor Darden, it's your turn.
Opportunity. That is what awaits us in this gubernatorial election and looking forward to the future. Whenever you have difficult times, you can transition those difficult times into a successful opportunity, and I believe that's precisely what Louisiana can do. We don't need Washington answers. We don't need Washington rhetoric. We don't need think tanks. We need Louisiana thinkers to help address the problems that we face and chart the future that we want to see for our children over the course of not the next 4 years, but the next 25 to 50 years. And I think that's the most important thing that people need to be looking at and thinking about in this time of crisis, is let's take advantage of the challenges that we have and make certain that we don't squander the opportunity that's been presented to us, which Louisiana unfortunately has a rich history of doing, squandering opportunities. We've had largesse in the past. We've had hope in the past. We've had leaders who we expected to call upon to change Louisiana, to change the direction of Louisiana, the spirit of Louisiana, and it hadn't always happened. But as Carl said, this is the opportunity for us to make that happen. I won't say this election is the most important election, because that is a trite expression that everybody says, but it's obviously an important time for Louisiana to make a decision as to which way we want to go. And I think if you look at the records of the candidates, you look at the temperament and the policies of the candidates, you look at their ability to communicate and to bring people together, I hope and I think you're going to conclude that I'm the guy who ought to take advantage of this opportunity for Louisiana. I grew up in Baton Rouge. I've lived in Baton Rouge my entire life. I went to LSU and went to the LSU Law School. My wife and I have been married for 31 years. We have 2 sons. I grew up not on platforms and rigs with an engineer, but with a dad who graduated from Plaquemine High School and had a track scholarship to LSU. He ran a 900-yard dash. They weren't running in meters back then. He had to turn down that scholarship because his dad has lost his job in the wake of Huey Long, actually. He was a U.S. postmaster, and he lost that job, and he was unemployed, so my dad went to work at then the Standard Oil Refinery in North Baton Rouge. He spent 41 years at Standard Oil Refinery. He ran what they call the vault. When he passed away in 1990, engineers who I didn't know came to the visitation to say, your dad took care of me when I was a young engineer at Exxon, showing me where the blueprints were, where I had to go in the plant and what have you. So I certainly grew up understanding the importance of what this industry means and have a great appreciation for it, I will tell you. Now, I spent 15 years in the Louisiana State Senate. I worked very closely during all those 15 years with your organization and other business organizations. I was Governor Foster's floor leader at the time where we really changed the complexion of Louisiana as it relates to tort reform. The most meaningful changes that had to take place took place on that watch, and I was involved in crafting that legislation, assisting in most of that legislation, and a lot of progress was made during that time. We've got more to do, but a lot of progress was made during that time. The people of Louisiana have given me the opportunity to serve in 2 statewide offices, executive positions, where I had to manage budgets and manage people. The Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism with 800 some odd employees across the state, and a budget that has been dramatically challenged during this administration. Not almost, but disproportionately so compared to others. But I have proven that you can do more with less. I have proven that with an appropriate management style and manner to address issues and bring people together, things can be done and things can be accomplished. We have had record-setting years in tourism, which is under my watch on the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, with dramatic cuts in what we've done. I understand what has to be done to set priorities. And we haven't truly set priorities in Louisiana over the course of the past several years. We've had budget challenges, but we haven't really set the priorities we need. I spent 4 years as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee and 4 years as vice chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. I don't have all the answers. I leave that to Senator Adley. That's why I always talk to him when I'm looking for answers. But we can get people together. We can get Republicans and Democrats, and those are not affiliated with any party, to sit down and talk about what we need to do to make Louisiana even greater than it is today. And I wake up every day telling people outside of Louisiana how great our state is and the many passions that we have, to convince them that they need to visit here and visit again and invest here and ultimately perhaps retire here, because that's the entire spectrum of what we do. And we've had great success in convincing people this is a place that they ought to be, and we can have even greater success in the future. And I appreciate LOGA giving us the opportunity to be with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Darden. Over to Commissioner Angel to round up the opening comments.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to spend my day with folks who will share my passion for a strong oil and gas industry. I'm excited about the potential to be your governor. It's not my first time being here, so I want to thank Don and Gifford for the courtesies that you've extended to me as we have worked together in a variety of ways. Many of you here an opportunity to see old friends and make new ones as we have worked to shape a robust oil and gas industry, and certainly trying to do it in an environmentally correct way. So I appreciate those courtesies that you've extended. I've appreciated the opportunity to work with so many of you as we have tried to move this state forward in a number of ways. You know, I believe every election cycle is different, and that what worked in one particular cycle won't work in another cycle. And I certainly believe, as I've traveled this state and I've crisscrossed, I've listened and I've learned and I've confirmed that what people want in their next governor is not only a governor who's right on policy, a governor who's pro-energy, pro-life, pro-economic development, pro-gun ownership, pro-economic growth, but a governor who is also right on people. And I firmly believe this morning that I am that person who is most right on people. I certainly believe that growing up in a small town as with one of 9 children in an incredible family life, where my dad was a conservative businessman and a public servant who taught me the value of homework and teamwork and cooperation and leadership and honor and integrity, and the son of a God-fearing woman who gave birth to 9 children and showed me the value of life and showed me the strength and gentleness of a woman's touch, and certainly being a brother to 8 siblings, sharing a dysfunctional kitchen table every night with a variety of challenges where you learn how to cooperate, collaborate, negotiate, and communicate at that kitchen table has served me well. I was raised in a family where mom and dad taught us that our communities, our church, our nation is indeed a reflection of our own efforts, and if you wanted to make a difference, you had to get off the sideline and get onto the playing field. I have spent most of my adult life on that playing field, playing for Louisiana in every way that I possibly could. And as I look to the future of the state, I see a variety of great opportunities. For me, I started at age 25, spent 16 years in local government, from the bottom up. I think if you talk to business folks across the state, you will find those that had started at the bottom have a greater appreciation for the work that has to be done. I started as a member of local government at the very bottom, and I continue to crawl and scratch and climb and bring business practices to my local government. Yeah, it was a small place, but it didn't keep us from doing big things. It didn't keep us from dreaming. I spent 16 years in that area, and in 2003, I got asked to consider being the Secretary of Natural Resources by Governor Blanco. I took that job, and I noticed that the drilling rig count was up in Texas, it was up in Oklahoma, it was up in America, but it was down in Louisiana. That something was radically wrong in the state of Louisiana, that at that particular time people were investing in the drill bit in other regions, but in our province they were saying no. And as I looked around and I visited with stakeholders across, and I went to Lafayette, and I went to New Orleans, and I went to Shreveport, and I went to Houston and Dallas, and I went to Oklahoma, where the drill bit dollars are originated from. I found that we had some radical things that we needed to change, and we needed to start with our attitude. We became a state that kind of lost our way. Certainly in the 50s and the 60s, if you were going to be a major player in the oil and gas industry, you had to be in Louisiana. In the 80s, the sand shifted, the world got smaller, and no longer did you have to be in Louisiana. We needed a cultural change. I brought that cultural change to the Department of Natural Resources, and we saw a tremendous increase in that drilling rig count. It starts with an attitude that recognizes that you have a choice where it is that you deploy your capital. And we're not the only game in town. And when we lead with that kind of attitude and get rid of some of the old things that we always thought were the way to go, I think we have demonstrated there is a way to attract capital in this state. I've been a part of the generation that's done that. We'll talk a little bit later about the Haynesville Shale during the course of this conversation, some of the things we did working with local government. But I firmly believe, with a background as a petroleum landman and experience in this industry, I'm uniquely prepared to lead this state and to work with this industry to improve the quality of life in Louisiana. Thank you for the taxes you pay and the jobs you create. Looking forward to being with you today.
Thank you, Commissioner Angel. We're going to move into the question and answer portion of the discussion this morning. Each of the candidates will have 2 minutes to respond to each of the questions. For the first question, we're going to begin again with Commissioner Angel, then to Lieutenant Governor Darden, then to Representative Edwards, and finally Senator Vitter. Our first question: legacy lawsuits continue to plague the oil and gas industry. How can you help the state move forward and encourage investment in Louisiana again while curbing these types of lawsuits?
Thank you, Jason. Before I talk about what we may do, I want to talk about what we have done. In 2006, I had the pleasure of working with Senator Robert Adley, who I often call a warrior in the Louisiana legislature, to work on the first major legacy legislation reform in the state. Tough stuff that came out of a Senate committee by a vote of 4-3, off the Senate floor 20-19, and out of a House committee by 8-7 before making its way up to the governor's office for signature. Stuff that required tremendous cooperation. In fact, I have a quote that I got from Don that he commented after this. He said, "If you're looking for leadership, political wit, and inexhaustible energy, look no further than Secretary Angel." That's the kind of thought I brought to the legacy lawsuit issue. Wasn't perfect. We tweaked it again in 2012, working with Hilario, Adley, Allan, Abramson. And I'm a firm believer that the climate that we had at that time and continue to have to a lesser degree today has chilled the investment of drill bit dollars in this state. And when companies have a choice where they spend their money, and we're not a place that looks really good, they go elsewhere. So I do believe there are opportunities to tweak. I think we have to make certain that science is in the courtroom. We have to make absolutely certain that what the Commission of Conservation and the Secretary of DEQ thinks is important can be introduced to the jury in a variety of ways. They need to see what the state thinks. I think we need to look at judicial reform in areas where we have financial disclosure for our judges, just like we have for the legislative branch and the executive branch. I think that's good policy. And I think we need to work with Farm Bureau and our landowners to make certain that we can find the common ground that we need to move the ball a little bit forward. Thank you.
Mr. Darden.
I was out of the legislature and in statewide office when most of the discussion and the debate about the legacy lawsuits began in the legislature, and I give credit to those who were involved in that exercise, a very difficult, challenging political exercise that has resulted, I think, as a result of 2006 and 2012, in finally some clear guidelines for these lawsuits. And my sense is that you are probably going to want to see how that works over the course of this legislative session, not necessarily be involved in a lot of tweaking of it right now, but see if we can let the law that is in place work, because it obviously is going to allow landowners to take care of the surface problems and to create, as I understand it, a rebuttable presumption that the plan submitted is a good one and can work. And that's been the issue. Where does the money go? Is it going to actually go to cleanup, or is it going to go to other people who are going to be unfairly enriched at your expense? And lawyers are going to be in the business of trying to find ambiguities in this law. That's what lawyers do in lawsuits, trying to find where there are weaknesses, where there are places that you can get a result that was not intended by the legislation. I'm hoping that this legislation doesn't have the ambiguities that people are going to be looking for. If it does, then they absolutely need to be tightened. It's not fair to put landowners, to put people who've been involved years before with land in the position that you've been put in with these legacy lawsuits. I hope that this law is going to work as it is. If it doesn't, we'll work to fix it, because it's a terrible detriment and disincentive to investment in Louisiana, a frustration, obviously, to those of you in this room who work for the industry, and we've got to make sure that the industry continues to be the vital part of Louisiana's economy that it has been for decades.
Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Jason. Obviously, it's very difficult to curb legacy litigation because bills were successfully passed through the legislature in 2006, 2012, and 2014, and this is the first question at the forum in 2015. So that's obviously a very difficult task, but having served on the Civil Law Committee over the last 7 years and looked at this issue, I happen to believe that for the most part, the rule of law stated in our Constitution does not allow you the remedy that you really seek. And I'll tell you that that's the case because we obviously can't impair the obligation of contracts, and we can't retroactively apply substantive law changes. And the nature of legacy lawsuits is these are old lawsuits, and these are lease contracts that were entered into years ago that were governed by civil code provisions that clearly state that at the end of the lease you return the leased premises in original condition less wear and tear. No court has ever said pollution is wear and tear. And so that's the crux of the problem. And so what you all have been limited to do largely over the last number of years with these three bills is tinker around the edges with procedural changes that will never deliver the result that you really seek. And I was able to support the legislation in 2012. It was a true compromise. It was procedural in nature. I was not able to support the legislation in 2014 because I thought that it impermissibly tried to retroactively apply substantive law changes. But at all times, I worked with LOGA and members of the industry to try to see if there was a way forward that I could support. Ultimately, I could not, based upon my view of the Constitution and the oath of office that I took to that Constitution. Thank you.
Senator Vitter.
Jason, I'm the only candidate for governor this year who's made tort reform, litigation reform, a major component of my platform. I'm the only candidate for governor this year who said flat out the biggest problem we have for our business climate is the litigation environment. We have to change it. And it's important that I don't just say that before LOGA. I say it all around the state before every group virtually that I talk to. I get it because it's true. U.S. Chamber for Institute for Legal Reform ranks Louisiana 49th out of 50 states in terms of litigation climate. Louisiana was named the #2 judicial hellhole in the nation by the Tort Reform Foundation. But let me put it in more personal terms. I had to have meetings with oil and gas folks all the time, from small operations to the biggest. One I had in Houston of a big operation was with Jeff Hildebrand, head of Hillcorp, the single biggest payer of oil and gas related taxes to the state of Louisiana. He said, David, we have operations around the country and around the world. We go by the book. We take our responsibilities, including our environmental responsibility, very seriously. And we still have 75 lawsuits filed against us, and 70 are in Louisiana. and he's not considering any expanded operations because of that. That's why I'm going to take action. That's why I've already convened a tort reform working group to work on this issue. That's why I'm bringing in leaders from Texas to speak to stakeholders in the next month about how Texas got it right, including by building and supporting the political environment to make these crucial changes that we need. And I'll be fully committed to that as governor, including taking a leadership role, including making sure the right committees of the legislature have the right members on them.
Thank you, Senator. So for our next question, we're going to begin with Lieutenant Governor Darden, followed by Commissioner Angel, then Senator Vitter and Representative Edwards. Before I ask the question, let me ask a couple of you to pull your microphones up just a little bit to make sure everybody can hear you clearly. The question is, a stable tax environment is necessary for business growth. For over 20 years, the industry has fought with local assessors over the valuation of property taxes, specifically attempting to define fair market value. Industry has made several proposals that are revenue neutral, that will create a more predictable and fair environment and lead to less friction with the Louisiana Tax Commission. What steps are you going to take to ensure a more stable and predictable tax environment in Louisiana for the oil and gas industry? Mr. Darden.
Well, this is going to be the most challenging question of the day because we're in such a terrible fiscal condition right now in the state of Louisiana. A lot is going to depend on what happens in the legislature this year, if anything happens in the legislature this year, as to what changes may be put forward regarding the tax climate in Louisiana as it relates to exclusions and exceptions and credits and whatever the case may be. We obviously are not, in my view, if I'm there, we're not going to do anything that is going to be punitive to your industry. Business is already taxed too much, and the last thing we want to do is create disincentives for what is taking place in the investments that all of you are going to make. There's got to be some stability in the tax structure of Louisiana, and it doesn't exist right now, which is precisely why, unfortunately, we're lurching from year to year, trying to correct deficits, trying to deal with shortfalls, and whatever the case may be. There's got to be a long-term plan that looks to the future and that addresses the concerns that are out there, particularly for your industry. The same holds true with regulation issues. There are a number of regulation issues that I know we're going to be talking about. They start at the federal level. They go down to the local level as well. And you've got to have a set of rules that are consistent and stable. And as governor, that is exactly what I want to ensure, that you're not playing by different rules in different locations. And when it comes to taxation, you're not going to bear the brunt of balancing Louisiana's budget. You've had to do it too many times in the past, and we've got to make a concerted effort to make it clear that that is not the way that Louisiana is going to move forward. This industry is too vital to the state. It has been around as a staple of our economy for decades. Huey Long attempted to bring it down, and it didn't happen, and it's not going to happen as we look forward to the way we want Louisiana to look in the next 25 to 50 years.
Mr. Angel.
Certainly when we talk about the Louisiana Tax Commission, we're talking exclusively about ad valorem taxes and those taxes that are collected on a local level, but yet has oversight by this commission. Clearly, the issue that creates the problem is that the stability is not there because it all depends on who's the governor, who's on the tax commission, and obviously who's the assessor. When we talk about evaluation methods of equipment, I think clearly we need to start baking some of the definitions into the statutes as opposed to having the up and down yo-yo approach of depending on who's the commission, we get a definition going one way, and whoever's on the commission the following term, we get a definition the other way. There's a lot of functional obsolescence in a lot of this equipment. This is very complex stuff. I will assure you that I will appoint competent people on the Louisiana Tax Commission that understand functional obsolescence of equipment that's downhole, that while may appear to have a fair market value, actually in a lot of cases is a liability to the company that owns it. There's a better way to do it, working certainly with our assessors who have a tremendous amount of knowledge, with our tax commission, and with stakeholders. But I would tell you that stability is important. Stability drives investment, and one of the ways to get stability is to bake it into the statute so that if we then want to change it, we have a full vetting process opportunity available in a public discourse, in a legislative arena, with the governor and the legislature and the public, the assessors, local governments sitting together. But we've got to get some definition in the statutes. Thank you.
Senator Vitter.
You know, what we're talking about in terms of these local assessor and Louisiana Tax Commission issues, it's really part of a broader trend. And the broader trend is local government trying to find increased revenue however, wherever they can. Another phenomenon is hiring firms to go after companies doing business in the parish who get a cut of collections. That's a very destructive environment. It's a very anti-business environment, and it's a very it's a way that absolutely increases uncertainty. That's the sort of thing that leads to headlines like one I read in a newspaper recently, quote, energy companies at risk of higher taxes in Louisiana. You know, CEOs and others read that headline. That is not productive. So we need certainty and fairness. I don't think recent governors have taken a strong enough position leading that effort. Yes, they appoint members of the Tax Commission. Yes, it's important to appoint good, knowledgeable, competent members. I'll certainly do that. I'll take the next step and actually lead the effort to bring parties together and have certainty and fairness and institutionalize that for the long haul so that we know the rules of the road. Then at the state level, obviously, we need certainty and fairness. That's why I've said the first thing I would do as governor is immediately call a special session of the legislature focused on spending and budget reform and fundamental tax reform. And we need to bring a no-nonsense approach to looking at the tax code, to seeing what works and what doesn't. And certainly, that shouldn't be code word for getting rid of every credit or exemption or deduction in sight, because certainly some of those are fully justified, produce jobs, produce net revenue for the state.
Representative Edwards.
Property owners should have the benefit of a fair and consistent set of rules for assessing properties across the state, so it doesn't depend upon the whims of a particular assessor in a particular parish, so that you have to deal with all of those things on an individual basis. The rules should be uniform and transparent, and certainly I'm willing to sit down with you all and work to make sure that we can pass legislation that will codify that, so that we don't have assessors with the discretion to unfairly do that. But I will tell you, a big part of this is who the governor appoints to the Tax Commission, because the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, former head Dan Juneau, I remember reading something that he wrote, and that the Tax Commission at one time performed a lot better than it does now, and the only difference is who the members are. So the governor has to take that responsibility very seriously, appoint members who will be consistent and fair, and make sure that they're looking at the fair value of these things in a uniform and consistent way. And as governor, I will make sure that that happens. I think it's important for you all to have that stability and that predictability, so that you know that you're not being unfairly treated in one place and being paid, having to pay more than you should, or having to pay under protest, and that takes you a lot of time to get all of that resolved. So there's a lot that the governor can do, both by working with you from a legislative perspective, but also by making sure that the members of the Tax Commission are going to do their job properly. And with those two things, I think we can go a long way to resolving this problem.
So for our next question, we're going to talk about regulation. We'll begin with Representative Edwards, followed by Senator Vitter, Commissioner Angel, and then Lieutenant Governor Darden. The question: overregulation is felt in the oil and gas industry, but is most often talked about from the federal government and even state government. Recently, local government has begun to regulate the industry in Louisiana through increased fees and permits for roads, with lawsuits that attempt to block hydraulic fracturing, and by suing the industry for alleged coastal erosion. What role do you believe local government should have in regulating the industry? How do you discourage from the governor's office unnecessary regulations in general that prohibit business growth? Representative Edwards.
Thank you. Local government, I believe, has to have the ability to come to the table and express concerns about what's going to happen with respect to their infrastructure, with respect to other concerns that they might have on a local level. And I believe they just need to have a meaningful way to relate that both to the industry, but also to the Office of Conservation and the folks at the Department of Natural Resources to make sure that those concerns are fully taken into account. I do not believe that local government ought to have the opportunity to deny a permit for the operations themselves. And I know that they don't currently do that, and that is some of the talk with some of my colleagues, especially over towards St. Tammany, where they are having some issues with some local fracking. I have that going on in Tangipahoa Parish right now. Not as much as we would like, because the price of oil has dropped to the point where a lot of the activity has ceased. But there's very little to no opposition in my parish with respect to fracking. And my parish has, I think, taken a very proactive step with respect to some ordinances that were reasonable that address a lot of the concerns. And so I know that there is a way for local government, state government, and business to work together to make sure that all of these stakeholders can cooperate, and that all of them can have a fair say and work together to make sure that we benefit everybody concerned. And as governor, I will work to make sure that that continues to happen. I will tell you, with respect to whether local governments can sue for coastal erosion damages, I do not believe it would be proper for the legislature to preclude those suits. I have told that to the Police Jury Association, and I'm not going to come here today and tell you anything other than that. Thank you.
Senator Vitter.
Well, this is another example of the trend I was just talking about a minute ago. It's a broad trend of, in more and more ways, in more and more instances, local government trying to impose greater fees or greater restrictions and greater regulatory authority, either just to gain revenue or because of not in my backyardism. Look, I think that is a very dangerous, destructive trend. I think it is a big turnoff in terms of our business environment. And as governor, I would absolutely oppose it. Our Louisiana Constitution and our Louisiana statutes are very clear on 2 points. First of all, they fundamentally protect the right of owners of mineral interests to develop those rights. And secondly, they make crystal clear that the state is in charge of properly regulating that, not local government through zoning and other ordinances. And that's as it has to be. That is the norm around the country. Louisiana is not some outlier. And the reason is simple. Is a town council really the expert body about fracking? Clearly, that environment is not where the right expertise can come, and clearly it's subject to not in my backyardism. So I would strongly, strongly oppose that, strongly, strongly oppose frivolous lawsuits and other things, as you've seen in St. Tammany. And on the litigation side, that's another example of the same thing. I have serious concerns about parishes doing this, filing their own lawsuits, going their own way. Those specific lawsuits are in court. They're going to have to be played out in court. But a strong governor can certainly make clear that our strategy for coastal restoration has to be a team effort statewide. And if a parish wants to go its own way in litigation, it may have to go its own way in funding its coastal restoration too.
Over to you, Commissioner Angel.
Yeah, thank you. I believe the right approach is to, first of all, you have to care enough to show up. You have to care enough to know that 59 of the 64 parishes currently host oil or gas production. The only 5 parishes in this state that currently do not host production are East Carroll, West Carroll, Madison, St. Tammany, and Orleans. So clearly our locals are very, very important as they host this activity. But having said that, There is no doubt that we cannot have 64 parishes and 303 municipalities having their own set of rules and regulations. That regulation should be in a strong Office of Conservation. But we still need to understand that folk from the local level need to have a voice of at least someone listening to their concerns. You know, when you stop and think, I think you educate folks. 100% of our mineral income in this state goes into our general fund. And about 80% of our general fund is used to fund education, healthcare, or public safety. All very, very important things that locals have a big stake in. So locals need to understand, obviously, that when the state is doing what the state does when it comes to regulation, that it's in their best interest as well. And that's why it's important, and I advocated a greater sharing of the severance taxes that we collect in the state with local governments, so that as the host parish, they get some of the benefits. We have argued for decades in this state that the federal government needs to share more offshore revenues with us. It makes sense for us to share some of the severance taxes that we collect on the state level with our parishes. We've done that historically, and recently we've increased that. And I advocated for that because I think we need parishes that understand that the state gets the fact that they deliver some pretty important services as well, and we view them as our partners, but regulatorily it should be in Baton Rouge and not in 64 parishes and 303 communities.
Lieutenant Governor Darden.
Well, overregulation at its worst obviously comes from Washington, and we've had to deal with that in the context of the permatorium and the moratorium and blocking Keystone and everything else. That problem needs to be solved at the federal level with federally elected officials, and hopefully it'll change with the changing of an administration in Washington. I disagree with what Representative Edwards said and agree with what David and Scott have pointed out regarding state control of these kind of issues. You cannot have all these different rules and all these different venues when you've got a regulation at the state level with the Commissioner of Conservation. As it relates to local ordinances, obviously there are concerns at the local level, and I was on the City Council in Baton Rouge for 3 years before I went to the Senate, and local governments obviously have concerns about damages that may take place to their roads, for example, with trucks coming through. And I think in DeSoto Parish, when Haynesville exploded, I think what was done in DeSoto Parish to create a model legislation or a piece of legislation that could be a model for the other parishes in the state is the way to go. And the industry was involved in that. And LOGA can be involved in that. And I encourage you, as you've always done, to be actively involved in that discussion that takes place as we balance the interests of local government and state government and the federal government. Fracking obviously has been around for decades and has not been proven to be detrimental to water supplies. That's obviously the big concern for local governments, but I don't think it appropriate for local governments to have the authority to file suit to stop decisions that are made at the state level regarding drilling and permits that are going forward with the activity that all of you in this room are engaged with. Overregulation is a concern at every level, federal, state, and local, and those who are elected to positions like governor have a great deal of sway when it comes to how much regulation is going to be in place. The public needs to be protected, it will be, but not at the expense of an industry that is beneficial to the state of Louisiana.
Our next question concerns tort reform in general. For this question, we'll begin with Senator Vitter, followed by Representative Edwards, Lieutenant Governor Darden, and Commissioner Angel. Statistics show that unnecessary lawsuits have driven jobs and investments out of Louisiana. People continually are looking to Texas for answers to our problems. The industry believes that we need to enact bold tort reform measures to curb the lawsuit abuse in our state. Do you plan on addressing this issue of tort reform? And if so, how would you do this? Senator Vitter.
Well, as I've said, I think this is the single biggest black eye we have in terms of a positive business environment, the single biggest challenge we have in dramatically improving that business environment. We talked about legacy suits a few minutes ago. There's a great study done by David Dismukes at the Center for Energy Studies at LSU. He quantified the negative impact of those legacy suits, often frivolous claims, bringing in people who had nothing to do with the pollution and asking for amounts of money that have no relation to actual cleanup expenditures. $6.7 billion in decreased drilling expenditures, 30,000 employment opportunities that didn't happen. More than $1.5 billion in wages that didn't happen. We need to fix this. And that's why, as I said earlier, I've made tort reform a fundamental part of my platform to improve our business climate in Louisiana. And that's why, as I suggested earlier, I've already convened a tort reform working group. Some of you in the room are involved. And our next meeting is going to actually feature the leaders in Texas who put together this movement and very effectively led a long-term tort reform effort. Didn't just take a year or two. It's been a 10-year plus effort. They're going to come here, meet with stakeholders that I'm gathering to explain how they did that effectively, not just the tweaks in the law that are needed, the changes in the law that are needed, but how they put the political operation together to educate the public, to impact elections, to create the legislature needed to support that sort of tort reform. I'll lead that effort, and as I also said earlier, that will include being involved in making sure the right legislators are on those key committees in the legislature.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Edwards.
Thank you. I don't have any plan to look to Texas to fix our problems here in Louisiana. And with, you know, for example, Texas has punitive damages generally available. We don't have that here in Louisiana. I will tell you that from my perspective, if you back out BP claims and if you back out Katrina-related claims, people in Louisiana are no more litigious than folks anywhere else in the country. Now, will I support tort reform? Yeah, reform connotes improvement. So if I believe there's an area where we can improve the civil justice system, I will absolutely support that. I happen to think that we ought to start by looking at the one-year prescriptive period. As someone who practices law, I can tell you that that one-year prescriptive period does not allow enough time for people to resolve their claims. Lawsuits get filed that could be resolved without a lawsuit, and as soon as that happens, the transactional costs associated with that claim go way up. I think that's something that we should look at. We have the shortest period in the country, and I think it directly feeds into part of the problem that we're having in Louisiana. Now, I will be glad to entertain specific proposals going forward if they truly do promise to improve the environment in Louisiana. But, you know, there are a whole list of places where, or entities, I should say that Louisiana's business climate is very good. Louisiana is a Cinderella of business development. That's Facilities Magazine. You've got Forbes that says Louisiana, the new frontier for business opportunity. Louisiana in top 10 for national business climate. So we have a lot of studies out there, some of which say that we have a problem, many of which say we do not. So that is not an area where I believe we need to move too fast and too aggressively. We need to preserve access to civil justice.
Lieutenant Governor Darden.
I have a very clear 15-year record in the Louisiana State Senate of supporting efforts in tort reform and improving the judicial system. You can look at that record of accomplishment to move us to a point where we've made some progress on some of these lists, but we made a number of changes in civil law that greatly benefited the business community because it was the right thing to do, and we were able to get it accomplished, and I think some strides have been made. We certainly don't like the position we have on the judicial hellhole list by any stretch, and we've got to look at specific things that can be done. I'm going to give you a specific thing that can be done. For a number of years during my service in the legislature, before it was the cool thing to do, I was filing bills to change the jury trial threshold. I think the jury trial threshold needs to be reduced. I think that is a fair thing to do. Judges don't like it, and a lot of lawyers don't like it, but I think people ought to have a right to seek a trial by jury because many of the problems that we face in Louisiana that puts us at the bottom of this list, and let's just be candid about it, is concerns about the judiciary. and what judges are doing and judges' propensities on making decisions. And people ought to have a right to put their case before a jury of their peers and not before only a judge, because the law doesn't allow you to have a jury. That's a specific thing that I tried to do for years, and it's finally had some success in recent years. It's gotten out of committee. It's had some life. I think it made it to the Senate floor. That's something I will advocate. I also supported during my time in the legislature, and this is another controversial subject, is merit selection of judges. That shifts the politics, arguably, from the electorate to whoever the governor is to make appointments, but we ought to have an honest discussion about how merit selection has worked in a number of other states, because it's in place in a lot of states that rank high on the list of not being a bad place to go. And I want to explore that, and I think it would be in the interest of the industry to be looking at that as well.
Commissioner Angel.
Thank you. I certainly believe that judges ought to be elected. I believe that the electorate is capable of making good decisions, and any time we talk about giving the authority to a commission or to a governor to do those kind of things, it might work real good for you one day and might not work so good for you the following year. So I would be very, very cautious in that. Look, I believe the state's made some progress. The ban on the state use of contingency fee contracts is a good thing. We've obviously tweaked some of the legacy stuff. I'm for reform. I got elected at age 25. I brought business practices to an area that needed them. We made some big changes, and I saw what happens when you make reform. We took a sleepy parish and turned it into the second fastest growing parish in Acadiana. So reform works in a lot of ways. I did the same thing at the Department of Natural Resources. I inherited a coastal permitting system that had lost its way, taking over 175 days to get a coastal use permit. I brought about a different approach, working with a variety of stakeholders, federal agencies, local agencies, visited with the permit agents that were working in the private sector across the state, and we took that down to something like 35, 45 days because people were standing in line too long. Reform is tough, hard work, but it can happen, and I certainly will work with you for some of that reform. And I'm glad to hear that David is making this a big issue, and it's important. But it's also important to note that the jury threshold was raised to $50,000. And it passed the Louisiana legislature when David was in that Louisiana legislature, and it passed with 53 votes, and David was one of those 53 votes. So I appreciate you acknowledging my great work at the Cajun Dome and rocking the house over there, and I just want to make sure that I acknowledge your efforts on raising the jury threshold to $50,000.
Round us out. The oil and gas industry has a vested interest in a sustainable coast. The state has developed and implemented the Coastal Master Plan, but funding continues to be a roadblock. Recently, the industry has been cited as a source of funding, primarily through litigation. What is your approach going to be towards creating a sustainable coast, and what will be the industry's role? Mr. Angel.
I certainly believe that science ought to lead the way. It's the only way. It's the only way that I think we can get all hands on deck and move forward. I was happy to work at a time in the aftermath of Katrina and Rita, where we radically changed the way we approach coastal restoration and hurricane protection by forming the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority and charging them with the responsibility of developing a master plan that has since received numerous awards and has been revised since then. And all good stuff working towards the implementation and the restoration of barrier islands, marsh creation, shoreline protection, and all the above. It's clear to me that governors of different parties from different regions of this state have come together over the probably last 30 years and made it very clear that we passed the blame game, that the blame game will not fix the coast, but we really needed an all-hands-on-deck approach, and we could spend much of our time, if we wanted to, casting stones at shale dredging on some of the nutrient load that's coming down from the Mississippi River, creating a dead zone. We could talk about the timber interest in the coastal zone. We could talk about oil and gas. We could talk about the unintended consequences of the federal action of levying the Mississippi River and the Chaffalay River, and also the building of dams and locks on the river that kind of traps some of our sediment. We could talk about all those things. What we need to do is have, again, leadership focused on restoration using the Gulf of Mexico energy security monies that should be arriving in 2017, 2018, using the Restore Act monies that are now going to be available, that Louisiana has said very clearly we want to use that exclusively for restoration and protection. No generation has ever taken on a project of this magnitude and had every dollar in the bank when they started. We don't have to wait until we have every dollar in the bank. We need to do our share as a generation and pass the torch to the next generation. I'm reminded of the Eisenhower interstate system that was conceived some time ago, and we're still working on it. There is a way for us to restore the coast. It's worth invested in.
Thank you.
And I will support folks working together in a collaborative way. It's not about the blame game anymore.
Mr. Darden.
Well, let me answer this very specifically. There will not be an oil and gas processing tax that is used to pay for coastal restoration or any other service in Louisiana. I have consistently opposed that during my time in the session. I've locked horns with my friend Foster Campbell on numerous occasions to make sure that this had no legs whatsoever. So I want to tell you specifically, that's not the silver bullet to fix the coast in my view. The master plan is a tremendous working document that is a combination of diversions and some dredging, and that's got to be the answer. We've got to follow the legislatively approved unanimously master plan and begin implementation of that plan as funds become available. And we are fortunately, and I hope David is going to be successful in correcting the president's effort to try and not fund the Go Mesa dollars. And when that happens, then we get the Go Mesa money and we get the Restore money, and we potentially have other federal sources of revenue dedicated to coastal restoration. We'll start making progress on what is a $50 billion master plan to address coastal erosion. I chaired two committees for the America's Wetland Foundation called Building Resilient Communities and another called the Big River Works to examine the Mississippi River and examine the coast and what we can do to save it and what we can do to preserve the culture of Louisiana, which is a huge part of that land loss. With every foot of land we lose, a little bit of our culture sails off into the Gulf of Mexico as well. And that's an important thing for us to keep in mind and salvage. We've already lost more than we're ever going to be able to build back. But we can build back the coast, and we can start this restoration process, and it's important that we use that coastal money to do that. The lawsuits that are being faced right now in South Louisiana is not the answer. We're seeing that in the whole process where an unprecedented, to me, situation existed where lawyers got to make the decision as to whether a client appealed. I mean, I've never seen anything like that in my life, and that just shows you the misdirection, I think, of a lawsuit by an entity that is not the party to have any cause of action to seek that relief.
Representative Edwards.
Thank you. And as best I can tell, the court ruled that way, and which is what courts are supposed to do. They're supposed to resolve legal disputes. And that's why they exist. And that's why we have a code of civil procedure, so that they can get it right, and if they don't, we have courts of appeal. As governor, we will diligently pursue the full implementation of the Coastal Restoration Master Plan. It is a minimum of $50 billion. The real cost is closer to $100 billion over 50 years. Only a tiny fraction of that has been identified, whether it's BP fines, Go Mesa money, which hopefully Congress will stand by its commitment to this state and to other states on the coast, and the Restore Act. So I believe it's incumbent upon the governor to sit with the industry and work towards an agreement that is fair and that is reasonable, because it's important for the oil and gas industry too to have a restored coast in Louisiana. And as governor, I would like to know whether the industry agrees that its operations with respect to pipelines and canals contributed to coastal erosion, whether those activities were legal or not, or whether they complied with all the permit requirements, and what percentage of coastal erosion they might be responsible for, so that if an agreement can be reached, it is reached cooperatively at a table working together. And then if there's some money that can be contributed by the industry to go towards this problem, it can be structured out over a long period of time so long as the agreement is reached. I believe it's incumbent upon the governor to at least have those sorts of conversations. And if that would happen, and there's good faith shown and there's any progress, you wouldn't see, I believe, all the need for, or the people resorting to, I should say, the litigation. Again, I will tell you, I don't believe that it's the proper job of the legislature, though, to tell local governments that they can't pursue a lawsuit if it's ill-founded, if they don't have the right of action. You all certainly can go to court and have those things defeated.
Senator Vitter.
Well, this challenge to stop coastal land loss, to reverse a trend that's been going on for decades now, is absolutely crucial because, let's admit it, it's a matter of literally survival. And that's not an analogy, that's not a stretch, it's literally about survival. Survival for a big part of the state, for so many communities, all along the coast and even removed from the coast. Survival for this industry, the service aspects of the oil and gas industry, survival for all sorts of small businesses that work here and service the Gulf and other areas. So it's absolutely crucial. The good news is that we have, over a decade, made substantial progress. We've come up with a sound master plan. I think the key there is to improve it over time, but not to do it in fits and starts and tear it up and start over every 3 years, but to gradually improve it over time so it's sustainable. I've also been working on the federal level at better coordinating a huge element of federal law, which is mitigation requirements under, core permits. I think those requirements are too onerous, but wherever they are, they should certainly be brought to bear at the coast, not just be buying piney woods outside of Alexandria. And then we've made big progress on the funding side with GOMESA revenue sharing, which I helped finally pass through the Congress after we talked about it for 40 years. And we're not going to let President Obama undo that. In fact, I'm having very positive discussions with the head of the Energy Committee and others about expanding and accelerating revenue sharing. The Restore Act, the BP settlement, and other aspects of that, putting that to coastal restoration, those are big pieces of the puzzle on the funding side that are coming together. We need to actively follow through on that. Certainly, in closing, I agree that different entities suing the oil and gas industry is not a productive way to further that at all.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to move into closing statements. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for closing statements. We're going to begin with Lieutenant Governor Darden, followed by Commissioner Angel, then Senator Vitter, and finally Representative Edwards. Mr. Darden.
The most frequently asked question out on the campaign trail, such as it is at this relatively early stage, why in the world would you want to do that? People are saying, who would want to take on these problems that we have? And my answer is I'm excited about facing these challenges. I feel like I've prepared my entire life of public service to give me the opportunity to help Louisiana address the serious problems that we have right now, particularly from a financial standpoint. It's always darkest before the dawn, and I think the dawn is on the horizon for us in Louisiana. But we have to have the right person in charge. We have to have a person who has a record of integrity, a record of honesty, and I'm going to be honest with the people. I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear and tell somebody else what they want to hear. I've never done that. I've always been a straight shooter, and I think anybody who's dealt with me in the legislature will tell you. They may disagree with me, but I gave them an opportunity to be heard. I talked to them. I listened. I made a decision. I told them where I was going to be. That's what we need in a governor. And what we also need in a governor is somebody who loves Louisiana and cares about Louisiana and has no ambition beyond the borders of Louisiana. I've been acting governor of this state for 144 days last year and probably for a larger percentage thus far this year. But for the fact that if I issue an executive order, it'll be reversed as soon as the governor gets back in town, I'd be doing a lot to change the way things are right now. But I understand what the problems of this state are. I've managed 2 large state agencies with lots of people and lots of budget challenges and have had success at every level in which I've served. And I want to carry on that same mindset, that same attitude as your governor. I will have an open door. I will answer my phone as I always do. I will talk to people. I will listen to people and make sure that we collectively address the challenges facing Louisiana in a way that is going to enable us to move forward. I spent a lot of time talking and reflecting about Louisiana history because it's such a fascinating story. We're this incredible mix of people in Louisiana, this diverse human gumbo that has existed now for generations. And it has shaped the political landscape of Louisiana because of these different attitudes. But we're Democrats, we're Republicans, we're largely no-party people. That's the biggest registration right now because people are frustrated with the parties, and I don't blame them. They ought to be frustrated with what takes place in Washington, where nothing gets done. And I don't want to bring Washington to Louisiana. I want a Louisiana person who has been shaping policy and making decisions and moving Louisiana forward to lead our state as we go forward. We have an unprecedented opportunity with the coastal development and industrial opportunities that await us. And for once, let's be smart about it. Let's manage it wisely. Let's bring everybody to the table, reach agreement where we can or recognize where we can't, and move this state forward and make it the kind of place that we want it to be, not for ourselves, but for our children and our grandchildren. And I hope you'll agree that I'm the person to do that. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be with you today.
Commissioner Rangel.
Thank you. I certainly want to thank Jason and LOGA for allowing us to be here, and I want to thank my colleagues for having the courage to put themselves out to run for governor and their families, and wish them all the best. I've enjoyed the opportunity to serve for a variety of years and had a variety of campaigns, and have always focused on the positive of what I could do as opposed to what someone else couldn't do. And I intend to do the same thing. I absolutely believe Louisiana's greatest days ahead of us, but I do believe we have some challenges right in front of us, challenges that are going to require people to work across party lines, across gender lines, across geographic lines. We absolutely must focus on budget reform and tax reform in this state. We've locked up all of our revenue to take care of certain things. We've got statutory dedications, and then we have to cut the most important things on an annual basis. We've had a fire drill after fire drill after fire drill on how we approach our budget cycle, and quite frankly, the building is on fire. It is now time for us to be the generation that has the courage to reform. We have to look at the fiscal note process. There's no doubt about it in my mind that the fiscal note process lends itself to poor decisions. The board of directors of the state of Louisiana, i.e. the Louisiana legislature, looking at fiscal notes, making decisions based on what they believe is good information, only to find that information is often wrong and misplaced. We have to do a much better job when we give away a credit or exemption. We must make absolute certain that we're getting something in return for it. I intend to lead that process. I believe it's important that you elect a governor who has historically worked with folks. You don't get to change your stripes when you change your title. I believe my history of my career is such that I work with folks. And again, I think it has to do a lot of where you come from and who you are and how you were raised. We can disagree in kind ways, but we can continue to work forward. I think move forward in ways that can move this state. No question that the first focus for me will be budget reform and tax reform. We are collecting enough money in this state. We've got to spend it a little differently. We don't need less people paying more taxes. We need more people paying less taxes. There's a way to get that done, and I intend to provide the leadership working with colleagues across the state. Somebody asked me yesterday what was the #1 reason I thought I was qualified to be governor, and I thought I would share it with you today. This year marks the 15th and last consecutive year that I will have a teenager in my home. Diane and I have had 15 consecutive years of at least one teenager in our home. Marissa's 19, so we're looking forward to, to that clock turning 20. When you have 15 years of teenagers in your house, you learn how to lead, you learn how to manage, you learn how to say no, and you learn how to get along and move the ball forward. It's all about, in my mind, it's all about a governor who is interested in getting the ball across the goal line and not grabbing the headline. Thank you very much. Look forward to working with you.
Senator Vitter.
Thank you, Jason, and thanks to LOGA for this great forum. I've really enjoyed the visit. And Scott, I am envious. I have 6 more years of that. So I don't quite see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. Our oldest came home from Mardi Gras weekend with 12 of her closest friends from college, all to stay in our 1-story house. So that was a cozy experience. But we'll survive, and we'll have fun doing it. And we'll survive and prosper in Louisiana, and we'll have fun doing it. You know, we face enormous challenges. That's maybe an understatement. But in a time of great challenge comes great opportunity. In a time of crisis comes the ability to do things we wouldn't be talking about otherwise. Now, in Hurricane Katrina, when it hit southeast Louisiana, it was devastating. No one would have wished that on southeast Louisiana or anywhere else. And yet, from that crisis, from that disaster, came the ability to change some things that never would have changed otherwise, and change them for the better. That's the opportunity we face in Louisiana right now. When Wendy and I decided to make this race, and I announced my intention, I said, first day in announcing it, this is going to be my last political job, elected or appointed, period. And that's to say I'm going to get up every morning and try to do right by all people of Louisiana, from our best and brightest to our most vulnerable. I have a great job now. I have a great title now. I don't need to get in this race for any other reason than I'm excited to take on those challenges, address them squarely, not kick the can down the road, not avoid them, not play politics with them. And that's the only reason I'm in this race. And I think I'm preparing for the job in a methodical way, reaching out to folks all around the state. One way is I've been having a series of leadership forums on key challenges we face as a state. Each one involves about 25 experts and leading citizens from around the state to talk about that challenge, to bring best practices, their best ideas forward. In fact, later today we have one on crime in New Orleans. That's how I'm preparing to govern. That's how I will govern. That's how I have acted in public office, reaching out to you, being directly accessible, working with others, including building the most significant record, concrete record of bipartisan accomplishment of any candidate. And that's the sort of leadership I'll continue to bring to our pressing challenges. I'd be honored to earn your support and your vote. Thank you.
Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Logan, all of you for attending, and Jay and Dave and Scott. It's been a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I'm running for governor because it's time that we put Louisiana first again. In my estimation, we've had a governor who's done everything but that for the last several years. And as a result, we have been on a path that has led us to a very bad place. We've got many, many challenges that we have to face head on. Otherwise, we don't get to take advantage of those opportunities. Now, the fact of the matter is, I recognized that Governor Jindal was putting us on a bad path several years ago, and I have routinely and frequently stood up and said so. I don't know where my three colleagues were at that time, because it was very lonely. When Governor Jindal was at 70% but making bad decisions, I was by myself. Now that he's 30% and he's on the way out the door, there's a lot of people joining me. But the fact of the matter is, we can do a lot better in Louisiana. Now, we've got a severe structural deficit in this state. $1.6 billion, 1.2 of that before oil dropped a penny. We have cut higher education $700 million, and according to the governor, he wants to cut it $200 million more this year, maybe as high as $500 million. Health care cut somewhere between $400 and $800 million. Continue to not invest in our transportation infrastructure. We're not building roads and bridges the way we should, or repairing them. We're investing a paltry $20 million in our ports. Our neighbors are surpassing that. They're moving ahead of us. We're not going to be competitive. And those are things that are important to your industry as well. And we've got to work hard and make sure that we take advantage of every opportunity that we can. And when we travel the state and we have these forums, every time we talk about the need to put everything on the table, because we can't have these catastrophic cuts. We can't have hospitals in the capital city of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the biggest city in the state, the downtown hospital closing its emergency room. This is a disaster for this state. And we need to wake up and realize that, and we need to elect a governor like John Bel Edwards, who will get out of bed every day worried about the people who governed him, who elected him governor, not the people who are in Washington, D.C., or Wall Street bankers, or anybody else, not political party, but the people of Louisiana. That's what the people of Louisiana want and expect and need. That's why I'm running. I look forward to the rest of this race. I look forward to the election. And I look forward to being the governor of the great state of Louisiana, because together we can make this state great again. And I look forward to the challenge, because there really are tremendous opportunities out there if we will only have the courage to meet the challenges today. Thank you all very much.
obviously, I've had legislative experience and have been very supportive of this industry during my time as 15 years in the state Senate. And I talked to them today about prioritizing spending in Louisiana and recognizing that I've run 2 departments of state government. I've managed people, I've managed budgets, I've had tremendous success with an awful lot less money, and that's the kind of person we need in the governor's office.
Well, I grew up in an oil and gas family. I know firsthand that it's a vital part of our economy, it's a vital part of our culture, and we need to keep it that. You know, it's a struggling industry right now because of price. We need to do our part in the state, including by improving the litigation environment, the environment in courts. There are way too many abusive, frivolous lawsuits that drive a lot of jobs and a lot of businesses out of the state, including in the energy industry.
I think it was take a look at the record, take a look at where we've come from. You take a look at the fact that I have a degree in petroleum land management. I'm the only non-attorney running in this race. The fact that I have executive level experience, the fact that I have more local government experience. It seems like some of the grind that we're having right now is local governments interacting with state government. I think we need a leader who understands the industry, also understands local government. And of course, I think you take a look at my record when it comes to regulation, taxation, litigation. I've checked all those boxes.
My message to them is that as governor, I'm going to be honest with them. They're going to have a seat at the table, and that we're going to work together. I fully recognize the importance of the industry in Louisiana for job creation and economic development, wealth creation, and would do everything that I could to work with them to foster a climate here in Louisiana that would be conducive to them being strong. We need to partner with them so that together Louisiana can move forward.
This is a big election year for the state of Louisiana. We've had Governor Jindal's been in office for 8 years, so this is an opportunity to elect a new governor. We've got big budget concerns in the state, big legal concerns, big tax concerns in the state. And so, you know, the next governor is going to likely shape policy in the state of Louisiana for the next 8 years. And we need to hear from the candidates. We need to know where they stand on budget issues, where they stand on the oil and gas industry, where they stand on the legal issues and challenges that are facing the state. And this is going to be a great opportunity to hear about from all those candidates.
If people have questions like more information, what should they do?
You can go to our website, www.loga.la, or you can call us at the office at 225-388-9525.